One day in Saint-Tropez, a rich businessman named Eric Carradine visits Juliet Hardy while she's sunbathing. He tells her he has brought the car he promised, which makes her very excited. But when Juliet stands up to see it, Carradine shows her a toy car. Even though he's joking, Juliet stays calm and compliments the toy. Carradine tells her that one day she'll have a real car, saying her charm can get her anything she wants. Just then, Juliet's foster mother, Mrs. Mora, arrives and scolds her for not working. Juliet quickly gets dressed and goes inside to prepare for her job. Carradine apologizes to Mrs. Mora, saying he's the reason Juliet is late. He offers to make up for it, but Mrs. Mora refuses, thinking he only wants to impress her husband. Meanwhile, inside, Mrs. Mora catches her husband, Mr. Mora, looking at Juliet while she's changing. She scolds him, and Juliet laughs, which makes Mrs. Mora even angrier. Upset, Mrs. Mora tells Juliet that she has a bad reputation in town for being rude and not working hard. Instead of responding, Juliet rushes off to work. Later, in Carradine's office, he finds out there's a problem with their plan to build a casino and hotel in Saint-Tropez. The Tardot shipyard is on the land they want to buy, and the oldest son, Antoine, is against selling it. Carradine's secretary suggests he talk to Antoine since he'll be home for the weekend. Meanwhile, Antoine runs into Juliet on a bus. They catch up, and there's still a strong attraction between them. Before he gets off, Antoine invites Juliet to dance later that night. After their meeting, Antoine talks to Carradine, who expresses his wish to buy the shipyard. Antoine refuses, saying his family lives there. Carradine then offers 4 million francs for the land, but Antoine thinks it's not enough and stands firm. Carradine reminds him that their business is struggling and gives him 2 months to decide. Once Antoine leaves, Carradine's secretary suggests raising the offer, believing the Tardot family will eventually agree. However, Carradine thinks it's pointless to pay more for a small shipyard and ignores his advice. During the dance, Antoine tells Juliet he regrets waiting a year to be with her. He mentions their age difference as a challenge, but asks her to come with him to Toulon. When he asks if she'll go, Juliet agrees. Hearing this, Antoine tells her to kiss him, and she does. Unbeknownst to Antoine and Juliet, Antoine's younger brother Michel sees them together and feels jealous. Their youngest brother, Christian, encourages Michel to find someone to dance with to lift his spirits. When Antoine gets too intense with Juliet, she reminds him that people are watching. He listens and tells her to meet him at the harbor. Juliet leaves, but first goes to the bathroom to freshen up. While she's in there, she overhears Antoine talking to another man. She learns that he only wants a casual relationship and has no plans to take her to Toulon. Upset, Juliet storms out of the club and goes to Carradine's yacht. He's pleased to see her and introduces her to his guests, Mr. and Mrs. Vigil-Franck. Soon, Carradine offers her a drink, but she declines. He notices she's staring out the window, and when he looks, he sees she's watching Antoine. Suddenly, Mr. Vigil-Franck throws a dart that hits Juliet's hand, injuring her. Concerned, Carradine takes her to a room to treat her injury. Mr. Vigil-Franck realizes Carradine is upset and apologizes profusely. In the room, Juliet playfully asks Carradine to kiss her injury. He happily agrees, but she quickly pulls her hand away. Sensing Juliet isn't there willingly, he tells her to leave. Outside, Juliet sees Antoine but just walks past him. Trying to act casual, she rides her bike, but Antoine trips her, and they end up sharing a kiss. He invites her to spend the night with him, but she says no. He asks her out multiple times, but she keeps refusing. Back home, Mrs. Mora finds out Juliet has come home late. Frustrated with her actions, she tells Juliet they will send her back to the orphanage. The next day, Juliet releases her pets in the field since she plans to leave with Antoine. Unfortunately, Antoine's bus drives by without stopping, revealing his true intentions. Upset, Juliet looks for her pets, realizing her plan to leave is falling apart. Later, at the bookstore, Juliet poorly helps a customer, making the woman angry. The woman scolds her, but Juliet doesn't care. It turns out the welfare board assigned this woman to oversee Juliet's case. She warns Juliet that she will report her behavior to the board, but Juliet doesn't seem worried. Meanwhile, on Carradine's yacht, his secretary thinks that Juliet will end up back at the orphanage since he has seen the board's representative around the harbor. Carradine wants to avoid this, so his secretary suggests that Juliet either get married or be adopted again. One day, Carradine meets with Antoine to discuss buying their shipyard. Just then, Mrs. Tardot shows up and tells Antoine about Juliet's possible return to the orphanage. Michel overhears this and asks Carradine what they can do to stop Juliet from leaving. Carradine mentions that someone needs to marry her, which gives Michel hope. Wanting to take advantage of the situation, Michel walks home with Juliet and proposes to her. At first, Juliet says no, explaining that he doesn't really know her. However, Michel persists and shows he genuinely wants to marry her. Eventually, Juliet accepts his proposal. Their families disapprove due to Juliet's bad reputation, but despite this challenge, Juliet and Michel go ahead with the wedding. After the ceremony, they accompany Antoine to the bus stop. Although Juliet and Antoine still feel a connection, Antoine leaves out of respect for his brother's marriage. On their way home, they encounter Lucienne and her boyfriend, René. René teases Michel, saying he should get used to sharing his wife. Angry at the insult, Michel punches René, leading to a fight. Since Michel isn't experienced in fighting, he loses, and Juliet quickly checks on him. She is surprised by his bravery, while Lucienne thinks he is foolish for picking a fight. Later, in their room, Juliet helps Michel clean up and compliments him on how he looks, but he wonders if she can truly love him. She gives a vague answer, saying she enjoys being close to him. A few days after their wedding, tensions rise with her mother-in-law when Juliet asks Michel for 100 francs, which he doesn't have. He borrows from his mother, disappointing her, but she reluctantly gives Juliet the money, urging her to find a job. Juliet jokingly replies that she's working at being happy. Afterward, she goes to the bar to listen to the jukebox where Carradine finds her. He questions her happiness in her marriage, and while she insists she's happy, he doubts her, suggesting she isn't suited for married life. When he calls Michel a fool for marrying her, Juliet grows curious about his suggestion that Michel should better support her. Carradine explains that the Tardieu family won't accept his offer to buy their shipyard, and Juliet understands their attachment to it for security. Carradine is impressed by Juliet's ideas and offers her and Antoine a 30% stake in his business, making Juliet excited about buying her dream car. The next day, Antoine agrees to the deal but insists on managing the shipyard to protect their investment, which Carradine accepts. After finalizing the contract, Michel rushes to share the news with Juliet, but she can't stand the thought of Antoine returning and leaves in distress. She asks Carradine to stop Antoine, but he can't since the contracts are signed. When Antoine returns, Juliet makes him uncomfortable by showing affection for Michel and inviting him to their room. Antoine visits to voice concerns about theft, but quickly leaves upon seeing Juliet in bed. Afterward, she and Michel share a tender moment. Their laughter bothers Antoine. That night, Michel wakes up alone and finds Juliet near the store, which worries him. She admits she's starting to love him, but is scared of losing him. To reassure her, he promises his love. The next day at the shipyard, Carradine is startled to find Juliet with a gun, shooting at bottles. Upset, he tells her to stop, but she challenges him, making him angry. Antoine hears the commotion and asks Carradine what's happening. After Carradine explains, Michel gently scolds Juliet. Antoine then takes Michel outside to talk with Carradine, who questions if Michel's marriage will last. Antoine avoids the question and criticizes Carradine for meddling in their family. The next morning, Juliet goes to Antoine's bedroom and finds their wedding photo. As she lies on his bed, she enjoys the scent that reminds her of him. Unbeknownst to her, Antoine is just outside the room. Juliet gets up and leaves suddenly. Later, Juliet learns that Michel will go to Paris, while she has to go to Marseille for business errands. She begs her husband to take her with him, but he thinks she'll be bored. Juliet insists, and Michel tells her to be ready by 6 a.m. for the first bus. In the afternoon, Antoine arrives at the shipyard and notices their small boat is missing. Christian tells him that Juliet has taken it, which frustrates Antoine since the engine is broken. He quickly asks where she went, and Christian informs him she's headed toward the Camaro lighthouse. Antoine has no choice but to go after her. Soon, he finds Juliet stuck in the ocean with the smoking engine. Antoine swims to her and boards the boat just as the engine explodes, setting it on fire. To save her, he pushes her off the boat and then jumps into the water, bringing her to shore. Once they reach the land, Antoine collapses from exhaustion. Juliet watches over him, worried. The waves wake Antoine, but he doesn't move. Juliet decides to tease him, and he playfully responds. As Antoine starts to walk home, Juliet tries to win him over, and they share a close moment. Afterward, Juliet gets a fever and asks Christian to stay with her. He promises to help her until she feels better, which makes her happy. While he is there, he learns about her affair with Antoine. He thinks she still loves his brother, but Juliet denies it strongly. During their chat, Antoine and Mrs. Tardot arrive and overhear them. Later that day, Michel returns from the city, excited about his trip. However, Antoine seems uninterested, which worries him. He asks his mother what's wrong with his brother, but she doesn't explain. Instead, she tells Antoine to leave Juliet because of her infidelity. She promises they will support her if she causes any trouble, but Michel stays silent. Heartbroken, Michel goes to their bedroom to talk to Juliet, but finds it empty. Concerned, he leaves to search for her, making his mother sad. Meanwhile, Juliet heads to the bar, nearly getting hit by a car. Because of her fever, she doesn't realize the danger she was in. She orders a drink and waits for Lucien at a table. The man who almost hit her tells Antoine about the accident. Antoine is on the phone but realizes he should go to the bar to check on her since she seems unwell. Later, Michel walks into the office and asks his brother where Juliet is. Antoine replies that someone like her is probably at the bar. Michel brushes off the comment and starts to leave, but Antoine stops him, telling him to forget a girl like Juliet, which makes Michel angry. He confronts Antoine for his disrespect, but Antoine casually mentions he was with Michel's wife. Michel stays calm since Mrs. Tardieu already informed them about the affair and tries to leave again. Antoine blocks him and talks about his time with Juliet, trying to keep Michel there. Undeterred, Michel insists on finding his wife. Frustrated, Antoine pushes him and vows not to let him go. Without Antoine noticing, Michel grabs a gun from the drawer, threatening him. Antoine quickly runs out and locks the door. Michel demands the key, but Antoine refuses, leading to a struggle. Eventually, Michel overpowers Antoine and takes the key. At the bar, Michel sees Juliet dancing with Caradine. He wants to talk to her, but she ignores him, lost in her dance. Frustrated, Michel pulls out the gun, but Caradine steps in. In a panic, Michel fires, grazing Caradine. Antoine arrives just then, and Caradine tells him to come along. Michel slaps Juliet, but she just smiles. Meanwhile, Antoine drives Caradine to Nice, where he'll see a surgeon, worried about Juliet's impact on men. Caradine insists Antoine leave Saint-Tropez to give the couple space, threatening him if he resists. Later, Michel and Juliet walk home hand in hand.
Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell icon, and stay connected with us.